Kia ora, Marky here, and today I want to talk about retroactive jealousy and the sexual revolution. Okay, so retroactive jealousy is believed to be what we call a biopsychosocial condition, which means it's got three, or at least three components. I mean, maybe there's more, maybe you could add a spiritual component to that, but that's maybe something for another day. Biological, so this kind of fits with the theories of Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz about OCD. He wrote a book called Brain Lock, which many of you will have read. If you haven't read it, please read it because it will help your RJ enormously. He talked about basically different parts of the forebrain, the frontal lobes, not communicating with one another, and they're given things like memory and thought processes, so that rather than kind of thinking about something and then it kind of, you know, passing like a cloud in the sky, it goes round and round and round, the wash, rinse, repeat cycle. He thinks there's a big biological component to that. The psychological component is stuff like attachment, trauma, and all the things that go into the mix of who we are, other psychological conditions. And the social element, that's what we're going to be talking about mainly today with the sexual revolution element. Now, to kind of preamble this, I'm going to tell you a little story, okay? So make yourself comfortable, you know, sit by a crackling fire if you can. I'm not going to go on forever about this, but this to me illustrates it best, and I'll probably do another video on this for non-RJs. I used to live in Devon, in South Devon in the United Kingdom, in England, on the edge of Dartmoor, and Dartmoor is especially, I think it's the biggest wilderness area in the south of Britain, and it's a vast area. I think it's something like 365 square miles of heath and forest, and it's wild, hilly country, and it's full of myths and legends, lots of ghosty, roasty stuff and stuff about pixies and kind of folk tales, all kinds of things. So it's quite a wild place with a kind of, you know, a dark and savage reputation, but also very beautiful. You know, it's a place, a site of special scientific interest, place for wildlife. On a lonely road, not far from a place called Hound Tor, which is one of the big kind of tourist hotspots in Dartmoor, is something that if you didn't know it was there, you'd probably just drive past. But there is a raised area, rectangular, or I should say an oblong raised area of grass, kind of curbed by stone, with no marker, and it is known as Jay's grave, and it is a grave. And there are loads of spooky legends associated with it, and it's very kind of popular with paranormal people and that kind of thing, which I kind of think is fine, you know. There may be something in that. However, I think the real poignancy of this message is, of the message of this place, or for me, what the message that I think this place should give is lost, okay? And this is where I'm going to tell you the story, okay? As far as we know, some of this, you know, has probably been embellished, some of it is elements of speculation. But the story is, it's called Jay's grave because it was the grave of a young woman whose surname was Jay. We believe that she was either called Kitty Jay or Mary Jay, and there's folk songs about this now. So the story is that she was a servant who fell pregnant by her master, and because of the shame and the stigma around that in those days, she hanged herself. And because she hanged herself, you know, back in the day, suicides weren't buried on consecrated ground. There was lots of superstition about suicides haunting the living because they couldn't go into heaven because of the sin of suicide, which of course I don't think it is a sin. We'll maybe get into that in another video. You know, suicide is the result of you know, desperation, really. So she didn't even get the dignity of a proper burial. So she was buried on what would have been a crossroads. Now, it doesn't look like a crossroads now, but if you actually look, there's a road, a paved road, and a track, and the track crosses with the paved road. So it would have been a crossroads because obviously paved roads are a new thing, and crossroads would have consisted of tracks. All roads would have been tracks before paving, so it was definitely a crossroads. The idea of the crossroads was that it would confuse, if the soul was lost and wandering, if you buried it at crossroads, it would kind of get lost and confused and disorientated, wouldn't find its way back to anywhere where it could disturb the living. That's also the origin of the stake through the heart for vampires, because actually it was a stake that was driven through the heart of the body to stop it rising. It wasn't to kill a vampire, it was to prevent the body and obviously the soul or the spirit or whatever's left from rising from the grave and troubling the living. But that's by the by. So, spooky place, spooky reputation, people go and do vigils there, and one of the things they say is there are always flowers, fresh flowers placed on the grave. This is true, and nobody ever sees anyone put them there. Okay, well, I've seen people put them there. In fact, I put them there myself, but there is a story that ghostly forces put the flowers there. Now, for me, this grave, this little lost tomb that up until I think Victorian period was overgrown and wasn't even distinguishable if you walk past it, is a kind of a feminist monument, if you like. Really, it's a monument to all the women in days gone by who were shamed because of pregnancy. The men didn't get shamed. They kind of, presumably they lived happily ever after, probably got other young maids pregnant, probably had their fun and didn't carry any of the stigma of it. But the women were shamed, and Mary or Kitty J felt so desperate. She was probably ostracised, she probably had nowhere to go, she probably didn't know what to do. So in situations like that, hanging yourself probably feels like a good idea. Hanging yourself is never a good idea, but in those moments it feels like a good idea. So it makes me think of the tomb of the unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey. So for those of you who don't know, they found a soldier from, I think it was the First World War, that was unidentified. They could identify them now through DNA, I guess, but back in the day they couldn't identify the body. But the symbolism was that this is a tomb for all unidentified warriors. It's the unknown warrior, and I think Kitty J's grave, is a monument to the unknown, shamed woman. Now, how does this relate to retroactive jealousy and the sexual revolution? Well, this is in our consciousness, okay, this terrible shame of becoming pregnant out of wedlock, which of course is a terrible shame of having sex out of wedlock, okay. And the consequences of having sex out of wedlock were, in days gone by, dire, absolutely dire, okay. So it's in the consciousness of our parents and grandparents, or great-grandparents, depending how old or young you are, that this is a really bad thing, and it's become embedded in religion as well, which I think is a secondary thing. I think religion has religion hijacked kind of cultural norms, or if cultural norms hijacked religion, one or the other, but they've become enmeshed and embroiled. So it's embedded in religion. So this huge inherited shame, fear, panic, you must not become pregnant, you must not have sex before marriage, which to some extent applies to guys, but much, much less so. That's the kind of great irony that often, even in religious context, guys are kind of expected, and it's okay for them to play around, but women aren't. But there's kind of no logic in that, is there? Because generally speaking, this is within societies that kind of embrace heterosexuality and probably frown upon, or have frowned upon, homosexuality. So who are these guys gonna sow their wild oats with the women? But the women bear all the shame. Okay. And the guys want, this is where kind of, guys wanting to have a virgin bride comes from, and all that kind of thing. So this has gone back generations and generations, and it's a biological thing. I guess this is social and biological, or origins are in biology, because it's the women that get pregnant. Okay. So this is in our consciousness, whether we know it or not. Okay, whether we were brought up with those kind of values or whether we never saw those kind of values, they have got into our consciousness through media, through books, through literature, through films, through religion, through conversation, through, you know, it's kind of, you know, even cellular memory, maybe. Okay, and then along comes the amazing 60s and the invention of the contraceptive pill. So for a brief while, before all the diseases kind of started to scare, a lot of the diseases have been around for, you know, millennia maybe, but the things like HIV came along and scared people. But in that little gap, in between contraception being reliable contraception being readily available, the whole of the culture changed, and sex before marriage became okay, and in some ways it's now expected, you know, so people are ashamed of being virgins. People are, you know, are anxious if they get to a certain age and they haven't had sex yet. So we swing from this, you know, whatever you do, don't have sex before you get married, to, oh my God, you've got to get some sex, otherwise there's something wrong with you. Okay, so this is a complete head fuck. Okay, and you might say to yourself, well, you know, I've never thought about this. This isn't something that I've ever considered, so it's not affecting me. But these things are around. These things, you know, we take things in unconsciously. We take things in without realising them. All the kind of values of society, whether they be good or bad, old or new, we take them in. We kind of suck them in through our skin. It's like osmosis. You know, we do pick up on this stuff. So therefore, we're confused. You know, and I think a big part of RJ and the certainly the social part of RJ is this clash between the old school fears and the new world fears that, you know, oh my God, you don't want to stay a virgin, you know, you've got to get out there and prove that you're lovable, prove that you're virile, prove that you're a real man, prove that you're an attractive woman, whatever it might be. Clashing with these old fears, you know, and this is really messing with our heads, and I think it messes to an extent with lots of people's heads, not just with RJ sufferers. But if you've got RJ, this is probably going to be in the mix somewhere, and it's not helping. So something to think about, something hopefully to gradually unpick, gradually unravel, you know, that these things have had an influence on you and may have helped to distort your thinking, because of course RJ is all about distorted thinking. So, having told you a long rambling tale, I will say farewell, Rangi Marie.